Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
New evidence tonight of what sure looks a lot like bribery in plain sight. Reporters of the Washington Post unearthed Trump Organization records that show foreign interests with an open agenda of what they want the U.S. government to do for them, funneling money to the president. The Post obtained the VIP arrivals list at Trump's D.C. hotel and learned a wealthy Iraqi sheikh who openly advocates for U.S. military strikes against Iran spent 26 nights in one of the hotel suites just last year, more than anyone else on the list. Suites at the hotel started about $1,000 a night, meaning the sheikh likely spent at least $26,000 at Trump's hotel last year. And he's just one name on a list of more than 1,200 individual VIP guests. Joining me now, David Fahrenthold, one of the Washington Post reporters who broke the story. He covers the Trump family and its business interests and won a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of Donald Trump's questionable history of charitable givings. David, what are these documents you got your hands on?
They're called VIP arrivals lists. So every day, the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C. tells its staff, here are the important people coming in, people you should keep your eye out for, either because they're important or they're spending a lot of money or they're staying a long time. So it's a list of faces and names and often a little explanation of why they're important. So we're going through this list of VIP arrivals for a particular day in November of last year, one of the ones we got leaked. And we see this one guy, Naro Al-Kaznazan, staying for 26 days, which was, of all the 1,200 stays we documented, his was the longest, which made us interested in finding out, well, who is this guy and what does he want?
Who is he and what does he want?
He is the leader of a Sufi order of Muslims based in Iraq. He is in the world of Iraqi politics, a minor player who wants to be a really big player. He would like to be president of Iraq, and he also would like the U.S. to launch military strikes against Iran, who he sees as sort of his main rival. And that's the same thing he's been coming to Washington to lobby for, is talking to the National Security Council, to the Department of State, calling for U.S. military strikes on Iran.
You know, he's not, of course, not alone. I mean, one thing that struck, I want to get to some of the others again. One thing that struck me is the VIP list itself is important because if what you're trying to do is influence the Trump administration, right? Like, they have to know that you're there and spending a lot of money on them. Yeah. It doesn't work if you're doing it anonymously. But the fact he's on the VIP list means that someone fairly high up in the organization do know who the big spenders at the hotel are.
Oh, of course, yeah. Every day there's between 10 to 30 of these people who are VIPs. And, you know, some of them are just people visiting from out of town, people who, you know, have no affiliation with the government, don't want anything from Trump's government. But some of them do. A few months ago, we documented T-Mobile, right? T-Mobile executives announced this merger that needs Trump administration approval. The next day, 9 of them checked into Trump's hotel. So you see patterns like that of people who really need something from Trump's government making this public show of spending money with Trump's business.
We've also got Saudi-funded lobbyists who paid for 500 rooms. The Trump Hotel story, I believe you broke. ProPublica has broken stories about folks in the payday lending industry down at Mar-a-Lago spending $1 million. There's no central repository for us in the public to actually have a sense of who is paying for what in what Trump properties, who might have whatever interest, correct?
No, there's nothing like that.
What would it take to get that? I mean, this is all just being done piecemeal, right?
Right, through leaks, through, looking at public records. The only thing that's sort of like that, people are, the effort that's being made are these emoluments clause lawsuits filed by Democrats in Congress and by the D.C. and Maryland attorneys general. And those are sort of narrowly focused. They're focused on the D.C. hotel and saying, Trump Organization, tell us just who your foreign government clients are. Forget about T-Mobile. Forget about people who want something that aren't foreign governments. Just tell us who your foreign government clients are and how much they've spent. They're asking for that, but they're a long way from getting it.
It is Friday, the 7th of June of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Indeed, the French 77s are mixed and poured and ready for your imbibing pleasure, so please do. We've worked very hard to get to this day, and now's the time to relax and then get back up and get to work. We only got a minute. Boy. Nancy Pelosi says that she'd like to see Trump in jail. And Fox News is saying that only happens in banana republics. Boy, I don't know. I still have the lock her up ringing in my ears, and they didn't just mean Hillary. They pointed the finger at Nancy, too. Lock her up. But that only happens in banana republics when Democrats do it. When Republicans do it, it's just the good old American way. I have a feeling that the Republican Party has been bought and sold and taken over by a hostile foreign power, and they are no longer representing the true interests of America. I've had this feeling for really quite some time. Would joke about it because, come on, it's a joke. Republicans are our friends. They're the loyal opposition. Well, loyal no longer, and were they ever? There might have been some congeniality. Loyal? I'm not so sure. All those decades of liberal being a pejorative, Democrat being a pejorative, all of it. We have been put into the position of being the enemy. We are the enemy, and we call the Republicans the loyal opposition. Trump had to settle himself in front of all those crosses and stars of David and crescent moons at the United States National Cemetery in Normandy, France, with Laura Ingraham, that neo-Nazi, not honoring the dead who fought the Nazis in World War II. This personage, who somehow became president of the United States, attacked other Americans instead of honoring the dead of World War II. I know. He's just breaking norms. He's just deconstructing the administrative state. Well, that's not a good thing, folks. It really is not. What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, at the top, that was some discussion about that wealthy sheikh who wants to be Iraq's president and who also called for U.S. strikes on Iran, spent 26 nights and thousands of dollars at Trump's D.C. hotel. Bribery in plain sight? I guess if you do it in plain sight, it's not really a crime anymore now, is it? Well, on the rest of the menu, the Defense Department was forced to correct Trump's lies about medical treatment for the troops. The Border Patrol is taking medicine away from children, even as more children are dying in custody. And Trump takes credit for the Puerto Rico emergency aid he fought against for weeks, maybe years. After the break, we then move to the chef's table where, after meeting with Emmanuel Macron, doubts persist over Trump's attendance at the French G7 summit in Biarritz. And elite mountaineer Nick Hollis lays the blame squarely on incompetent climbers for driving the Mount Everest death toll. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly, for doing that. To the leftish of the page from the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. You will also notice our link to our Patreon site. And if you could, please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. Your recurring contribution goes a long way to paying our bills. And also, now that we are in this extended fund drive, as if we have never been on one, we're now putting out the plea because we are accumulating funds to purchase newish machinery, because these workhorses have worked for so long over these 8 years of continuous broadcasting and resisting as the founders originally intended. So thank you for your generosity in doing that. We're able to make those dollars stretch. Look, if you could afford a latte espresso type coffee drink once a month and put those funds towards our way, I can assure you, just by our very existence, we can make those dollars stretch, and we thank you for your contribution. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio, and Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. I take care of at Justice Putnam, and I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, iHeart. Did I say YouTube? Well, wherever podcasts can be found, you can find us there. Well, I haven't got into this personal dissonance that's been occurring since the beginning of the year. I haven't filled folks in on that for quite some time. I kind of felt maybe it was too much of an imposition. In the beginning, when my son passed, in retrospect, wow, my reaction was pretty strong and can be well understood, as people have told me. But I thought maybe the making public of that grief, a chronicle of grief, might have been a little bit too much. I thought maybe I might just fill you in quickly just to let you know, wow, is it hard. It is so hard. I'm part of a I guess a select group. More of us than even I imagined, and I've got a pretty good imagination. And reading and coming across people who have lost a spouse suddenly and understanding their grief and hurt and loss and confusion, even though being part of that select group, you know even more profoundly, what can you say? What can you say other than it hurts and it's going to hurt bad? And everybody tells me it's going to hurt for a long time. So one can numb that pain in some fashion. One can avoid it. There's all sorts of strategies. I don't know. I guess you just have to get used to it. Which goes against the grain of what I've always considered my poetics, my ethics, my moral structure. Get used to it. I rebel against that attitude. Maybe living with it. It's all in how you define the words, I suppose. With Father's Day coming up, am I still a dad? When your child passes and they're your only child, yeah, I have grandkids. But am I still a dad? I never thought of that before. You know? in the social construct of things. Once a dad, always a dad? Is that true? That's based on a supposition that when you die, you will be a dad because your progeny lives on. Well, My ex didn't do too well on Mother's Day. I guess I'll just have to steel my nerve for Father's Day. But I got a week or two to work on it. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes our way out of Share Blue Media by Dan Desai Martin. Trump's own Department of Defense was forced to issue a statement yesterday, Thursday, to correct ignorant remarks Trump made about transgender troops during an interview with Piers Morgan. On Tuesday, Trump lied about military policy when he said he banned transgender Americans from serving in the military because, quote, they have to take large amounts of drugs for that. Large amounts! And you can't do that. You're not allowed to take drugs. What the hell? Before Dan Desai Martin continues here, let me just interject. When you're given drugs by a doctor, it's called medicine. If you're given medicine by a drug pusher, they are drugs. Now, Trump being a mobster, you can understand the confusion. Back to Dan Desai Martin. Trump was wrong, according to a Defense Department spokesperson. Well, I think that Defense Department spokesperson will be out of a job, and whoever told them to say it will be out of a job too. The military health system covers all approved medically necessary treatments and prescription medications. Jessica Maxwell, a DoD spokesperson, told the Washington Post, if a service member has a hormone deficiency for any reason, he or she would be prescribed hormones. And reasons such as hypogonadism, hypothyroidism, menopause. Further, Maxwell assured that existing troops who had been diagnosed with gender dysphoria before the transgender ban went into place in April will continue to receive all medically necessary treatment. Well, apparently the Defense Department has disagreed with Donald Trump. I expect the whole Defense Department to be dismantled forthwith. Trump's ban on transgender Americans serving in the military was roundly criticized by medical professionals, soldiers, and Trump's own military advisors. The AMA stated there is no medically valid reason, including a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, to exclude transgender individuals from military service. Trump is denying others the ability to serve, even though he himself never served in the military, using a sketchy medical deferral to dodge the draft during the Vietnam War. Now, I don't want to pat myself on the back, and I don't want to toot my own horn too much. Now, my joke is that no decent military would ever have me, and I don't blame them. You know, I'm not really the type that gets kowtowed too much, shall we say. But I had some severe enough injuries from playing sports that if I had had a lottery number that was in the range in which I would have been drafted, I would have gotten a medical deferral because of those injuries. As it was told to me that by the military, actually when I looked into maybe joining, I was told by the recruiter, well, you know, if you had an individual doctor following you on the battlefield, you could work, but we just don't have those individual doctors to follow you on the battlefield if your knee gives out. But I still felt that service to the nation, service to the cause of this great experiment, was greater than military service, greater than a deferral I might have because of a medical reason. The medical reason never kept me from working a job, because I could go to the hospital right away if anything happened. A little bit different when you're on the battlefield, or maybe even sitting in a desk. Regardless, I looked into joining the Peace Corps, the State Department, because of certain political activism in my more ignorant youth, shall we say, for liberal causes, prevented me from getting the necessary security clearances, etc., that would allow me to go those tracks. Didn't stop me from volunteering on the local level in convalescent hospitals. In hospitals, I had some medical training. I've been paid to work in the medical field in, low capacity, no professional capacity by any means. But Donald Trump, in his palimony contract with his second wife, had a stipulation there. Not only would the child lose all monies from his great estate if she joined the military, but also if she joined the Peace Corps. Service to the nation, service to the country, service to the great cause of this great experiment is not part of Donald Trump's cosmology. He has never been a lover of America. He has hated America. America is only a vehicle in which to promote his greed. That's why all the mobsters want to get here. And he's selling them condos. I know, to launder their money. But now they're here. Next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, is also out of Share Blue Media, this time by Emily Singer. I swear to God, it will be my life's work to make sure Stephen Miller, Donald Trump et al. Go to prison. Their abuse of power can be taken care of very well by our congressional leadership. But I want to make sure, because my middle name is Justice. Yeah, my first name is Royal. So, yeah, it is my life's destiny and work to make sure Stephen Miller, Donald Trump et al. Go to jail for what they've done to asylum seekers. Customs and Border Patrol officials are confiscating critical medicines for children detained at the border. The news comes amid reports that at least 7 children have died in U.S. custody at the border, and that U.S. officials covered up the death of one 10-year-old girl for months. When I say et al., I don't mean that we need to stop at the low-level people doing these terrible crimes. They've been issued the orders. They've been hired for their cruelty. And those managers, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump et al., need to go to jail. I don't care to only see these agents going to jail, though they will be as well. According to Yahoo's report, doctors who treat children detained at the border say they've seen egregious examples of children who have had their medicines confiscated, including an 8-year-old boy who had his anti-seizure medicine taken. Dr. Eric Russell, who volunteers at a center treating asylum seekers who have been released from custody, says it's unclear how long the boy went without his anti-seizure medicine, but that even if it was just a day or two, that's enough to have triggered a deadly seizure. Look, I'm not going to miss my mom's blood pressure medicine by one. She's supposed to take one series twice a day. How dare they? My concern, Dr. Russell continued, what's going to happen if you put a 9-year-old child who has a history of seizures without any seizure medicine on a bus for 3 days? Is that he's going to have a seizure. Russell said that the practice of confiscating medicines could lead to serious injury or even death. And in this reporter's opinion, that's a feature, not a bug. The cruelty is the reason. At the end of a day, as a medical provider, as a physician, we take an oath to first do no harm, and taking someone's medication seems like it's causing harm. A Border Patrol official said taking medicines from detained migrants is standard procedure if the detained person doesn't have proof that the medicine was prescribed by a medical professional. Really now. The official said that they only take unidentified medicines out of safety for the migrants to ensure they are not illicit substances, and that it's clearly not true that life-saving medicines are being taken away. But another doctor interviewed by Yahoo News, Carlos Gutierrez, said that explanation is, quote, bullshit, end quote. Gutierrez told Yahoo News that he recently treated a 10-year-old girl who needed steroids to treat congenital adrenal hyperplasia. He said her life-saving steroids had been confiscated along with other necessary medicines she had. Without her medications, Gutierrez said she could have gotten an infection like a cold that would have killed her. You can ask providers who care for them day in and day out. Gutierrez, a pediatrician who treats asylum seekers in Texas, said, "We know that the medicines are being taken away." Now, this is just the latest report of detained children being treated horribly in U.S. custody. A Washington Post report from Wednesday yesterday said that the Trump administration is now cutting funds that pay for services allowing detained migrant children to receive educational aid and recreational services, as reported here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy just yesterday. The cruelty the Trump administration is inflicting upon migrants, including kids, seeking safety in the U.S. is hard to witness. But every new report like this adds to the well-established case that for Trump and his team, cruelty is the goal. Israel of Think Progress brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Donald Trump falsely claimed credit for rescuing Puerto Rico yesterday, Thursday, after signing a bipartisan disaster relief bill passed by Congress earlier in the week, a version of which he tried to reject previously. After weeks of working to stop aid to the U.S. territory, because he wants it for his border wall, which was devastated by multiple hurricanes 2 years ago, Trump finally agreed to sign the deal after bipartisan congressional leaders reached an agreement to move the legislation with or without his support. "Just sign the disaster aid bill to help Americans who have been hit by recent catastrophic storms," he tweeted. "So important for our great American farmers and ranchers. Help for Georgia, Florida, Iowa, Nebraska, North Carolina, and California. Puerto Rico should love President Trump. Without me, they would have been shut off." Nice little island country you got there. Be a shame if something happened to it. Except Donald doesn't realize it's not a country. It's a U.S. protectorate. It's almost a state. Trump has attempted to credit himself for single-handedly saving Puerto Rico in the past, even tweeting in April that he was the best thing that ever happened to the island. Yeah, no one else was willing to throw towels at people to mop up the floods. But Trump was brave enough to. However, the Trump administration faced heavy criticism for its botched emergency response efforts after a series of storms ravaged Puerto Rico in 2017, leaving thousands dead and many more without water and electricity for months. And actually, there are still people without electricity and water all this time, and they have blue tarps. There's actually been a report that the blue tarps are being taken down, which means that people are advancing and have their places fixed up. But really, the blue tarps are only rated for a few months, and some of those tarps were up for years after those storms. And the reason they're being taken down isn't because they're being taken down. It's pretty much because, yeah, they're just destroyed. They wore out. Now, recently, Trump attempted to stall the disaster relief bill because it did not contain funding for his border wall and because the Democrats had sought to include more aid for Puerto Rico, and he hates Puerto Ricans. He lives in New York, and I gotta tell you, the racism is palpable. I mean, even a comic book story like West Side Story talked about the racial animus against Puerto Ricans. And late last month, Trump said he would not do anything to improve the nation's infrastructure unless the Democratic majority in the House of Representatives halted its oversight responsibilities, saying Congress could not go down more than one track at a time because he's incapable of multitasking, and everybody must not be able to do that. Hours after that carefully scripted tantrum, as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called it, congressional leaders of both parties agreed on a disaster relief bill that included Puerto Rico funds, but no border money, and Republican leaders informed Trump that they planned to move on it whether he liked it or not. All right, let's get on with our break, and when we come back from that break, we were going to go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today, and maybe take a sip or two of these French 77s. They're all waiting. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, a fresh take on the coming-of-age tale. Booksmart may not be an original concept, but the take on it certainly is. Beanie Feldstein and Caitlin Dever play Molly and Amy, best friends and overachievers who are about to graduate from high school. They've played it straight throughout school and are off to their respective places at the Ivies when Molly learns by accident on the last day of the semester in the school's unisex bathroom that the kids she has viewed as burnt-out losers are also off to prestigious schools but have also had lives outside of the classroom. This shatters Molly's illusions about herself and makes her determined to attend at least one cool party before graduation. And there's your setup. With a reluctant Amy in tow, the first challenge is to actually find out where one particularly promising party is being held, since all they know is that it is at the home of a classmate's aunt. Hilarity ensues as the girls figure it out. The end result is sort of a mashup of Superbad, which happens to star Feldstein's older brother Jonah Hill, and Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, but with female leads, female screenwriters, and a female director in the person of Olivia Wilde in her debut in The Chair. While those facts alone are noteworthy, Booksmart makes the grade for its smart humor, its insightfulness into what it's like to be a young woman today, and for the chemistry of the two leads. Feldstein is the breakout here, with Dever a close second, and they get stellar support from Jason Sudeikis as the principal, Lisa Kudrow and Will Forte as Amy's supportive but out-of-touch parents, and Billy Lord as the weird rich girl who always seems to be around. Booksmart goes a long way towards redefining the buddy movie and will be hard to beat as Comedy of the Year. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. The English language version of Wikipedia has almost 6 million articles. And if you're a cheating student, that's 6 million essays already written for you, footnotes and all. Except plagiarism isn't really an effective tactic. Just plug the text into a search engine and game over. But what about having a ghostwriter at a paper mill compose your final essay?
Standard plagiarism software cannot detect this kind of cheating.
Stefan Lorentzen is a data analyst at the University of Copenhagen. In Denmark, where he's based, ghostwriting is a growing problem at high schools. So Lorentzen and his colleagues created a program called Ghostwriter that can detect the cheats. At its core is a neural network, trained and tested on 130,000 real essays from 10,000 Danish students. After reading through tens of thousands of essays, labeled as being written by the same author or not, the machine taught itself to tune in to the characteristics that might tip off cheating. For example, did a student's essays share the same styles of punctuation, the same spelling mistakes? Were the abbreviations the same? By scrutinizing inconsistencies like those, Ghostwriter was able to pinpoint a cheated essay nearly 90% of the time. The team presented the results at the European Symposium on Artificial Neural Networks, Computational Intelligence, and Machine Learning. And there is one more aspect here that could help students. Your high school essays presumably get better over time as you learn to write, and the machine can detect that.
The final idea is, of course, to try to detect students who are at risk because their development in writing style is not as you would expect.
Teachers could thus give extra help to kids who really need it while sniffing out the cheaters too. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
What is the future of Roe versus Wade?
I'm Frances Crowe, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with my good friend, attorney Bill Newman.
In 1973, in Roe versus Wade, the United States Supreme Court recognized reproductive choice as a woman's fundamental constitutional right. But in 2019, that right to reproductive freedom, the right to an abortion, is under unprecedented and ferocious attack. Donald Trump has emboldened anti-choice forces with his appointment of 2 Supreme Court justices, with the context being the president's explicit promise or threat of overturning Roe versus Wade. Alabama has seized this time to pass a law that prohibits virtually all abortions, and Missouri, Georgia, Ohio, and Kentucky are close behind. If the Supreme Court were to uphold Alabama's law, it would destroy Roe. But the court could also destroy Roe as a practical matter by giving lip service to Roe in a future decision, but then permitting onerous restrictions and obstacles to access. We make no predictions, except one, and that is that there will be strenuous opposition to undermining the right to choice in the courts, in the Congress, in the state legislatures, and on the streets.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom cannot defend itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. The leader of Lansing, Michigan's United Auto Workers Union, Lester Washburn, returned home in the wee hours of the morning. He had been in Detroit for a meeting. At his home, he found a disturbing scene. His wife was missing, and their phone line had been cut. His children were home alone. He found a public phone and started making calls to find out what happened. He learned that the sheriff had arrested 8 people in a 2 a.m. raid, including his wife. The charge was violating an injunction issued against the strikers at the Capital City Wrecking Company. The action at the plant started in May, part of a wave of strikes led by the United Auto Workers that year. Strike organizers had largely ignored the injunction. Lester had only evaded arrest by not being home. Outraged by the arrests, union leaders called for a workers' holiday. Calls for a general strike echoed throughout the city. It's estimated that as many as 12,000 workers took part in the workers' holiday. Strike supporters also parked their vehicles on roadways and in intersections to block traffic throughout the city. Michigan's Democratic Governor Frank Murphy arrived in Lansing, where he addressed a crowd of more than 4,000 downtown protesters. He pledged to oversee a meeting between the strikers and local authorities. He was able to facilitate the release of those arrested on bond. He also managed to get the Capital City Wrecking Company officials to the bargaining table. The workers' holiday in Lansing was another important chapter of the auto workers' fight to bring union recognition to the auto industry. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
The clock is ticking on the Mexico tariff time bomb. Officials from both the U.S. and Mexico negotiated Thursday into the evening with no deal being reached. Talks resume Friday. Trump threatened to impose a 5% tariff on Mexican imports starting Monday if Mexico doesn't do more to stem the tide of Central American migrants that end up on the southern U.S. border. For that to happen, he must sign an executive order Friday. American importers have warned the White House and Congress that tariffs could unleash a logistical nightmare. Just one day after Joe Biden and his campaign reaffirmed his support of the controversial Hyde Amendment, which bars federal funds from being used for abortions, and enduring criticism from opponents and the public alike, Biden flipped.
I can't justify leaving millions of women without access to the care they need and the ability to exercise their constitutionally protected right. If I believe health care is a right, as I do, I can no longer support an amendment that makes that right dependent on someone's zip code.
So Joe Biden now joins with every other one of the 24 or so declared Democratic presidential candidates. We already had read a transcript of a voicemail that Trump's former personal attorney, John Dowd, left for Michael Flynn's attorney. An edited version even appears in the Mueller report. But for the first time, a judge ordered the release of the audio recording. In it, we hear Dowd demand a heads up about what Flynn was telling Mueller. And it surely sounded like he was dangling a pardon when he mentioned Trump's feelings towards Flynn.
Maybe I'm sympathetic. I understand your situation, but let me see if I can state it in starker terms. If you have, it wouldn't surprise me if you've gone on to make a deal and work with the government. I understand that you can't join a joint defense. That's one thing. If, on the other hand, there's information that implicates the president, then we've got a national security issue, or maybe a national security issue. I don't know. Some issue we've got to deal with, not only for the president but for the country. Then, we need some kind of heads up, just for the sake of protecting all interests, if we can, without you having to give up any confidential information. And if it's the former, then remember what we've always said about the president and his feeling toward Flynn. That still remains. But in any event, let me know, and I appreciate your listening and taking the time. Thanks, Paul.
Stay tuned. With the graves of U.S. troops who sacrificed their lives in World War II behind him, Donald Trump gave an interview to Fox News' Laura Ingraham and tore into Nancy Pelosi, calling her a, quote, nasty, vindictive, horrible person. Pelosi is said to have told Democrats pushing for impeachment that she would prefer to see Trump thrown in jail rather than just removed from office. With the cemetery at the site of the Normandy landings over his shoulder, Trump hit back.
I think she's a disgrace. I actually don't think she's a talented person. I've tried to be nice to her because I would have liked to have gotten some deals done. She's incapable of doing deals. She's a nasty, vindictive, horrible person. The Mueller report came out. It was a disaster for them.
He obviously doesn't abide by the old adage, politics ends at the water's edge. Go figure. Pelosi, when asked by reporters to respond, said she'll wait until she's back on U.S. soil. You're probably aware that June is LGBTQ Pride Month. It's to commemorate the events that happened 50 years ago this month. On June 28, 1969, historic protests began at Manhattan's Stonewall Inn after police raided the popular bar that was a gathering place for the LGBT community. The protests at Stonewall are credited for giving birth to the LGBTQ movement. The anniversary of the riots was marked with parades through New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Chicago, celebrations which became what is now International Pride Month. On Thursday, after the organization responsible for NYC Pride said they had voted unanimously to demand an apology, the commissioner of the New York City Police Department, James O'Neill, did just that.
I think it would be irresponsible of me as we go through World Pride Month not to speak of the events at the Stonewall Inn in June of 1969. Well, I'm certainly not going to stand up here and pretend to be an expert on what happened at Stonewall. I do know what happened should not have happened. The actions taken by the NYPD were wrong, plain and simple. The actions and the laws were discriminatory and oppressive, and for that, I apologize.
And finally, an important fixture on the American music and New Orleans music scene has died. Dr. John, the 6-time Grammy winner and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame member, whose real name was Malcolm John Rebenek Jr., died of a heart attack at the age of 77.
I've been in the wrong place, but it must have been the right time. I've been in the right place, but it must have been the wrong.
And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com/donate.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 51 degrees Fahrenheit, slated for a high in the mid to upper 60s, overnight low in the low 50s. Winds are currently out of the south-southwest. A negligible 1 to 2 miles per hour, we call that. Light and variable. Mostly cloudy conditions will continue throughout the day, though the winds will shift out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour and bring in some more cells of rain. We did have a little bit pass through here while I was watering, by the way, so I had to turn the water off and let the sky do its work, and it did. And we may have some more scattered rain as we go through the day. Mostly clear tonight, and then tomorrow we're going to have sunny conditions with a high of 78. Inching up over the weekend, and by Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, we should be topping over 100, though that will come down by next weekend and only be in the upper 80s. So we got that going for us, which is nice. Grass pollen is rated at very high. The air quality index is in the good range at a very low 9 parts per million, though the daytime UV index is very high at 9. Ouch. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.97 inches. Visibility is at 8 miles, and the relative humidity is at 81%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Programmers, that's my P-tape. Do with it what you will. London is 66 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 64 and cloudy with wind, and oh my, it looks like there is a wind advisory in Paris, so take care. Rome is 88 and sunny. Kiev is 83 and fair. Kabul is 75 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 82 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 68 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 60 degrees and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 54 and mostly cloudy with a wind advisory on the bay for small craft, so take care. And New York, New York is 77 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny as all hell. And that's how it is in the Big Apple. That's how they talk. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Anonymous worker bees at Reuters bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I know that mostly chefs bring the amuse-bouche at the beginning of the repast meal, but here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, we have a little kiss at the end. Never sweet, but always savory. Donald Trump did not confirm he would attend August summit of the G7 group of rich nations in southwestern France city of Biarritz. And that's where rich nations would go. That's where I would go. And I'm not even a rich nation. I've been there. It's fun. And that was because when he met President Emmanuel Macron on Thursday, a French official said, well, we don't know now. We weren't expecting it, and we don't expect it even more now. Foreign ministers meeting at the G7 held in Brittany earlier this year were overshadowed when U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo chose not to attend, underscoring how tough agreeing common ground between allies has become at the annual Big Power Summit. Along with the U.S., France, and Britain, the group includes Japan, Germany, Italy, Canada, and the EU. Tensions between the U.S. and its European allies have meant that where they were once largely in accord, they now seek the lowest common denominator at international gatherings. Trump briefly set aside his testy relationship with Macron yesterday, Thursday, heaping praise on U.S. war veterans in a speech to mark the 75th D-Day anniversary and steering clear of issues that might rile Europe. Macron and Trump have had a difficult relationship, at odds over the Americans' unilateralist approach to trade, climate change, and that nuclear deal with Iran. Trump spoke of an outstanding relationship yesterday, Thursday, while Macron described their bond as extremely strong. However, when asked whether Trump had committed to attending this year's G7 summit, a French official debriefing of reporters after the meeting said that was still unclear. You'll have to ask Trump the question. It's important for us that he is in Biarritz, and we are hopeful he will be there. In 2018, Trump threw those efforts of other leaders to show a united front into disarray by leaving early, backing out of a joint communique, and criticizing his Canadian host.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Kate Kelland of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Stepping over long-dead bodies of frozen climbers as he sought to reach the summit of Everest was something for which Nick Hollis was mentally prepared, but even this seasoned mountaineer could not have imagined there would be so many fresh ones. The 45-year-old British climber had just conquered Everest and completed all 7 summits of the world, putting him into an elite group of around 500 people globally who have scaled the highest mountains on all 7 continents. His final summit, the 29,035-foot peak of Everest in the Himalayas, was made much tougher than expected, partly due to the presence of too many slow and inexperienced climbers, perilous to themselves and others. But you know what they say. Money doesn't talk. It swears, especially when you're freezing to death on the way up to Everest. Nepalese officials say 11 people have died on Everest this season, 9 on the Nepali side and 2 on the Tibetan side, making this the deadliest season since 2015. And Krakauer wrote a book about that. What I had not expected to see was so many bodies of climbers who died either that day or the day before, Hollis said in an interview. It's no exaggeration to say you're walking over bodies. Now, the Nepalese government issued a record 381 permits this year, each costing $11,000. And Hollis said that traffic problems were down to several factors, including poor weather and large numbers of people, but he says that in his view, giving out extra permits or just even a cap on permits means that, say, for instance, you cap the permit at 200 permits. He says you're still going to have about 100 inexperienced climbers who are going to cause themselves to die or other people. And they are all inexperienced, and if they got the money, they can climb. He wants to have a rating system and certificates from here on out to be able to do that. And I agree. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and for the week. But you know Netroots Radio is going to broadcast on through the weekend. We'll meet up on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.